Jamie Rhodes, please. Yeah. Oh, there you go.
I was hiding over in the corner.
What's that? I'm sorry?
I was hiding over in the corner.
You were, right in plain sight. Yeah.
Chairman Haney, members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I'll try to keep it quick about this bill. First off, as many of you know, this issue has been before the legislature, either in the House or Senate in various forms for much of the last 4 years, beginning with a study commission in 2012 to 2013, chaired by Senator Walaska. I've referenced that study commission report. It's up on the website. I encourage everyone to take an opportunity to go back and see what some of your colleagues have already looked at when it comes to this. Instead of delving into the real details of this bill, I want to speak about it from three perspectives, and I think there are three key constituencies that this bill is going to impact. First off, there's Rhode Islanders in general. Obviously, any bill the legislature enacts impacts everybody here. I want to talk about producers, brand owners of material, packaging materials being sold into the state. And lastly, I want to touch real quickly on how this impacts on municipalities, which I think is where the focus of this legislation needs to be. So first off, when we look at our recycling system, here in the state, there's two ways that it works. First off, there's us buying stuff. We buy packaging, we buy materials, and within that price that we pay for, whether it's a bottle of water that's sitting on your desk right now, whether it's a blister pack toy, whether it's anything across the board in consumer goods. When you buy that product, you're paying for the raw materials that go into it, you're paying for the labor, the manufacturing costs, you're paying for the marketing, you're paying for the distribution, but you're not paying paying a single cent into what to do with that material after you're done with it. What happens when you drink the water out of that bottle? What happens when you drink the soda out of that can? When you bought that product, not a single penny of it's going into that effort. Instead, that entire responsibility is put on our local governments. Every single aspect of managing that waste, from collecting it at your home to running a transfer station, is being a burden on your local governments. I say burden very carefully. Right now, recycling, many people think of it just as part of our waste collection stream. We started collecting garbage as local governments because it was a public health issue. We started collecting recycling because people wanted all of their other stuff collected as well. The plastic bottle and that aluminum can is not a public health issue. It's a resource issue. It's valuable, or it should be valuable at least. But right now, we're paying for this piece of the product and when we buy it, and the rest of it we're paying for through our taxes. What this bill proposes to do is to make it, when you buy it, you pay for the whole thing. Why should we separate this? What's the point of separating it? It's about choice for consumers, and it's about fairness for manufacturers of material. Right now, by tax dollars, I have no choice but to pay for and subsidize the recycling needs of all of my neighbors. I live in Warwick. We have curbside pickup. I don't buy plastic water bottles, but my tax dollars are going to pay for a recycling program for plastic. I personally don't think we should have plastic water bottles, but I don't have a choice but to fund it. If we move it to this other system, extended producer responsibility, I pay for the recycling program that I use. When I buy aluminum cans, I pay for aluminum can recycling. When I buy plastic bags or use plastic bags, I pay for recycling of plastic bags. This way, it's a choice of the consumer to make sure we know what we pay for and what we don't have to pay for, rather than saying, I don't have a choice about paying my car taxes and my property taxes, but it's still going to pay for things that I'm not using. And the same line, it's about fairness for local governments, individuals, and brand owners. Right now, the brand owners and the manufacturers of packaging material are making money off of the fact that we're collecting this as taxpayers. They want to get this material back into the recycling stream. They want to see this as part of their recycled content standards. It's a marketing advertisement for it, and it helps them reduce overall supply costs. But they're externalizing the entire cost on taxpayers. It's fair by having manufacturers be part of the process of collecting the goods that they're putting out into the market and bringing those goods back into a circular economy for them to reuse again. So from the perspective of Rhode Islanders, it's about making the system about when I buy a product, I pay for the whole thing, rather than only paying for part of it when I buy it and letting my tax dollars pay for the rest. The next piece is about how this impacts manufacturers. Now, it's important to note that most of the rest of the world does this. They looked at the way that waste is happening in the country, in the world, and saying, we have a lot of changing materials. There's revolutions in plastics technology. There's new types of plastics, flexible plastics being put on the market very quickly. And for manufacturers, they have no incentive to make sure that that's designed for the recycling systems are in place. Instead, they can say, I want to do flexible packaging with 3 different types of materials. We can't put it in the MRF. If it goes there, it has to be separated out and landfilled because they can't handle it. We don't have the technology to separate this. So instead, the manufacturers, the idea here is to make sure that they're part of the conversation of optimizing the system to meet what they're going to do, as opposed to having a lag time of years or decades in between it. But I understand manufacturers, brand owners, they'll come and say, we don't want to do this. And that's really the core of their argument. We don't want to do this here. We'll do it everywhere else where we've passed laws to say it, but we want to do it here. And I don't blame them for not wanting to do it. Ask any municipal government person, any DPW director, any sustainability director in the state. It's hard. Our recycling rates are stagnating. The materials are changing too quickly. There needs to be infrastructure investments, and they don't want to do this. And I don't blame them. Our municipalities don't necessarily want to do it. That's not to say they can't do it, because that's what they can do, and they've proven it time and time again across the world to say, we can do this. And in fact, the same companies that have often opposed it here in the U.S. are the same ones that are promoting it in Europe and saying, this is the core of our economic strategy. This is the core of us building a circular economy and making sure that our materials are staying within the market system. But lastly, and most importantly, we need to be looking out for our local governments. As I said before, 100% of these systems are being paid for by our tax dollars as property taxes, car taxes, and what aid our cities and towns get. But right now, I put in my testimony, I pulled just a couple of cities and towns, the line items for them when it came to recycling collection. I believe, I don't have it right in front of me right now, but I believe Providence spent about $2.1 million. Warwick spent roughly $1 million, maybe 1.2. This is what they are expending to collect this material. This bill takes that, and instead of making it a cost, makes it a revenue generator, because they're providing a service to both the residents of Rhode Island, and they're providing a service to the brand owners of the material that they're collecting. This bill would allow them to get paid to do the job they're doing. That's critical. Alternatively, if they say, the city of Providence says, you know what, we just don't want to do recycling collection, that will still be provided by the industry. The law says we must maintain at least the system that we have right now. And so to that end, it allows our municipalities to say, this system is changing too quickly, we can't necessarily invest in it, we've got other particular headaches we need to handle. Let's move that money back into what municipalities are good at and what municipalities need to do, and let this piece, which is benefiting the manufacturers and brand owners, let them handle it. And so to that end, what really needs to happen here is that this is about looking out for our municipal governments. The tip fees are being raised. The cost of the labor cost and the running of trucks is rising. The overall waste system is getting more expensive. And this is an opportunity for us to say, let's make it a fair way of funding that system that needs to grow and needs to be nimble and needs to adapt. Let's pay for it the way we pay for everything else when it comes to what we buy, when we buy it. Let's bring that right up front and put that cost into when we purchase it. So that's my quick bit about it. I'll be happy to answer any technical details of the bill that you might have. I've been working on this for a while. My contact information's in it. I'd be happy to talk about any of the individual pieces at any time here in the hearing or individually. But thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Rhodes? Rep. Marcello, excuse me.
I know this may be from left field, but do you have any idea on average the extra cost that to implement a program on any particular product or in general?
I was going to say, are you talking about on a product specifically or overall?
If you have overall, number one, but if you have a specific product like a water bottle, like a soda can.
So I know Victor Bell here is coming up later. He'll be able to give a better perspective of the individual since he does his compliance programs for these products in the rest of the world. I did reference in there the program of British Columbia where they've been operating this now since May of 2013 and have their first year, I referenced their first year report. For them, the average cost of the program overall was $27 Canadian per household in the province of British Columbia. I would imagine our cost here would be less because we're not as remote, we're not as mountainous, we have more curbside, less transfer. That being the translation of that, I believe, is about $20.32 if I got my Canadian to U.S. exchange rates down. Just a hobby, I guess. But that's a rough estimate of the overall program to an individual household thinking of all of their consumer products that they buy. But I'll let Victor talk about the individual cost of the product.
Any other questions, Ms. Rhodes? Rep. Philby.
Could you give us the life cycle of a plastic bottle under this program, please?
The life cycle of a plastic bottle under this program. What's that? We're under any program, I guess. So I think under our existing, the way that we operate right now, I'll say this so that my answer is in context. So the bottle itself is being, virgin oil feedstock is being mined or drilled. It's being going through the manufacturing process, which creates the different types of polymers that you might have, which is then manufactured into a plastic bottle by a manufacturer, which is then being purchased by a brand owner, which is slapping a label on it and putting something inside of it, which is then being sold to the consumer, who uses the product inside. And then that bottle, here's that moment, about less than 30% of them are being put into a recycling bin, and the rest of them are being put into the trash for the most part. The 30% that are put into a recycling bin, depending on the quality of the other plastics that it is connected to, gets chipped up and put in back as melted down and put back into the pellets and then re-put into the feedstock of it. The stuff that's landfilled is, well, landfilled. And so under an EPR program, that process is the same, with the idea of instead of seeing a 30 to 70% divide, this should be a way for us to move more of that into that 30% and grow that recycling level. So the more of this we can move back into the recycling of it, then the less of this comes from virgin feedstock, and more of it can come from recycled products. Now, once again, I won't go into the nuances of the recycling about whether it's mechanical or chemical, and whether that's able to keep it to be valued as a polymer, or whether it gets downcycled into other materials, which is a whole different conversation that we could have at some point. But the idea, that's the concept that's supposed to happen. The idea is that the loop doesn't necessarily change, except that we move more of it into the recycling aspect of it and less into the disposal aspect.
I was speaking more financially. So the purpose of the bill, it uses an economic incentive to achieve a result.
Yes. Sorry.
So can you distinguish, just illustrate today versus if we pass this bill, please?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I went in a completely different tangent than what you asked. Right. So if we look at the financial model of it right now, so I'll kind of simplify a little bit. That right now, a brand owner who's putting a product into a plastic bottle purchases that material. That product then is sent to a distributor and sold at the distributor at wholesale cost, which is then sold to individual retailers who have that price markup, which is then sold to the consumer. You have that entire chain, at which point, in an interesting note, we have multiple levels of taxation that come in at both an excise tax level, at a resale tax level, and we also have this permitting. We have this litter permit tax, which is a whole other can of worms that we could get into, and we might have a fun conversation about it. And at that point, once the consumer has it, when they put it into the recycling bin, my tax dollars once again pay for the collection of that, which is then transporting it to our good friends at Resource Recovery that's sorted out, and then if it's collected in a way that's valuable, that retains its value, that's sold then on a commodities market, which the value of that goes to run the operations of Resource Recovery, and additional value of it is distributed between the cities and towns right now as a refund. Those numbers of what those refunds are, I'm sure they have them on hand, but let's just say it does not nearly cover the cost of collection, not even close, and with the plastic bottles happening at a loss. It has to be a much more valuable material for it to be profitable. So under an EPR system, what happens now is that what would happen under this would be the plastic bottle, when the brand owner sells it to the distributor, there's going to be a portion of that goes off to an organization whose sole responsibility is to manage, fund, and invest in the recycling system at the end of the life. So at that moment when the brand owner sells it to the distributor, there's a fee. That fee is not set by the government. That fee is set by the brand owners themselves. And they say, what's it going to cost me to get this bottle back, or to get these 10,000 bottles back, or this whatever it's going to be? What's it going to cost me to invest in that system? Let's look across the entire marketplace. Let's work together to figure out what that cost is, and we're going to pay it on, which is reflective of what we're selling into the market. So at that point, they set the fee on themselves, and they send that to this organization, which is solely going to be responsible for that. Once a consumer finishes that product, to get them to put it into the recycling and get that recycling to be as valuable at the end side of it. Because now the responsibility for that material, once it's in the recycling stream, is back to the industry. It doesn't go through the municipal government hands. The value, the ownership of it and the value of it gets to be returned to the brand owners, hopefully an incentive for them to include it in their future products.
Why would this make a consumer more apt to recycle?
Well, the idea of it is that part of the investment in the industry would be getting us to recycle just as much as they get us to buy the stuff, to get us to dispose of it appropriately.
You presume there'd be marketing campaigns on behalf of the industry?
And every other place,
Really recycle.
yes, and every other place has been put in. It's a regulatory requirement of you must be investing in education programs. In many places, that is done in partnership with the municipalities because municipalities are good at working with it. But once again, municipalities are being paid to provide this service.
Has there been a similar program where they take the shared responsibility payment and subsidize it directly to municipalities?
So
Do you think that would encourage more recycling and more participation in this program if it was a direct subsidy to the taxpayer's tax bill?
So when you say subsidy, it really depends on which way you mean. So in one way, it would be the municipalities are going to be running an education program and they're going to be picking up your curbside stuff. And so in those scenarios, those municipalities are in fact being paid at a contract rate to provide that service. So that's one way. I wouldn't necessarily call that a subsidy. I would call that in fact paying a vendor to provide a service, in which case the municipality is uniquely situated because we've been running these programs, we're decent at it and we can get better, and to do education because we're on the ground, we have that close connection directly to our residents. We can do that education because we're there, while like a brand owner, a Coca-Cola, Unilever, they're not necessarily as closely connected at that decision-making point as a municipality, but to have them fund the municipal efforts to do it.
So the money from the shared responsibility payment, is it going to the municipality to subsidize, maybe I shouldn't use that word, but to...
to pay them as vendors.
To pay for the collection.
Yeah.
To reimburse.
Yeah. This would be a municipality, the way this is rolled out in other places, the municipality has the choice. I want to run my programs. I'm good at running my programs, and I will accept your contract to run my programs. In which case, yes, the money will go to the municipality. Or a municipality could say, I've had a vendor contract to do this. I don't want to play middleman. Why don't you, industry, directly contract with the vendor to provide that service here? In which case, the municipality says, I'm out of the game. Great. But then there's also, especially in in British Columbia, where we have the closest example of this, when that opportunity came in, some cities said, I don't trust this. I don't want your money. I don't want you to take over the program. I'm going to continue to do this as I used to do it. I'm going to pay for my programs out of the property taxes or user fees and go on with it. And what we've seen is after the first year, a number of those cities go, that was a bad choice. We'd like to get into it now. The best example being the entire city of Vancouver, saying, hey, we ran it on our own for the first year. We saw how the program works. We'd like to hand over all of our collections to the industry.
So you have this initial payment. The initial payment is divided into different tranches, or does it?
It'll be managed by a third, once again, the example of other places, it's handled by a third-party nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide the recycling service, the recycling system, invest in the recycling system necessary to meet the obligations set by this law that the manufacturers have. They delegate that responsibility to this organization, and that organization, that's their mission.
And that organization sets the rates?
And they set the rates internally. Thank you.
Other questions, Mr. Rhodes?